This conference will now be recorded.
Right, live life out loud from the Proverbs. That's our topic for tonight. I just wanted to introduce why I've chosen this topic. It's a little bit interesting because I saw it first as I was reading through both the Psalms and Timothy, and it sort of it grabbed me. I sort of thought there's something here that I've never actually heard spoken about, and I wanted to show you, just to introduce the topic as a whole, just a few verses. Let's start with Psalm 22. It's a psalm that we all know relatively well, but it has a lot of this living life out loud sort of theme running through it. And what I mean by living life out loud is what we do with our mouths. It's how we open our lips. It's how we talk. It's instructions for us how to speak out in the Word of God, or because of the Word of God. It's what God asks us to do with our lips. And it's people who've said things out loud, prayed out loud, sung out loud, those sort of instructions. And that's what I've been looking at as I've been sort of looking through the study of living life out loud. So we just start with Psalm 22. I just want to very quickly read through a whole lot of verses, and you get the idea of where I'm coming from with living life out loud. So Psalm 22, verse 1, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? And you can hear that. It's something you can actually hear, the groaning. Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Verse 5, to you they cried and were rescued. Verse 22, I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. Verse 25, from you comes my praise in the great congregation. And in verse 31, they shall come and proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn. And if you flick over to Psalm 66, we have the same sort of thing. Again, a really, really noisy psalm. And these are the sort of things that just jumped out at me when I started thinking about it. Psalm 66, verse 1. Shout for joy to God, all the earth. Sing the glory of his name. Give to him glorious praise. Say to God, how awesome are your deeds. So great is your power that your enemies come cringing to you. All the earth worships you and sings praise to you. They sing praise to your name. And you can hear the loudness in that. You can hear the singing. You can hear the praise. You can hear the joy. You can hear the shouting. Verse 8, bless our God, O peoples. Let the sound of his praise be heard. Verse 14, that which my lips have uttered, which my mouth promised when I was in trouble. And verse 19, but truly God has listened. He has attended to the voice of my prayer. And again, this isn't a prayer that's said in the mind. It's not a prayer that's just sort of like praying. This is a prayer that's actually said out loud to God. And that's what I'm looking at with Live Life Out Loud. Come over to Psalm 98. Here's another quick example. Psalm 98, verse 1 again. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song, for he has done marvelous things. Verse 4. Make a joyful new noise to the Lord, all the earth. Break forth into joyous song and sing praises. Sing praises to the Lord with the lyre and the sound of melody, with trumpets and the sound of the horn. Make a joyful noise before the King, the Lord. Let the sea roar and all that fills it, the world and those who dwell in it. Let the rivers clap their hands, the hills sing for joy together before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. And so again, there we hear another variety of sounds where we're living life out loud, not only with the praises and the songs, but also with the musical instruments. All those things are helping us to live life out loud for God. And if we flick across to Timothy, and this is another area where I really saw living life where I really saw living life aloud come out in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 and 4 is another good example. As I urged you when I was going to Macedonia to remain at Ephesus, so that you may charge certain persons not to teach any different doctrine, nor to devote themselves to endless genealogies and so on. That you may charge them. Now, that wasn't a thinking thing either. That was something Timothy actually had to go and he had to do and he had to speak. And it's also an instruction for us. Have a look at chapter 2, verse 8. I desire then that in every place men should pray, lifting up holy hands. And you're going to go, well, sure, we can pray. We can sit there and we can fold our hands and we can bow our heads and we can pray silently. And listen to the next bit. I desire then that in every place men should pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or quarreling. And you don't quarrel when you're quiet. Therefore, you can't pray. The whole context says that these prayers are done out loud. Have a look at chapter 4, verse 11 to 13. When I find it, he says this. Paul says to Timothy, and it's also a command to us, I'm sure, command and teach these things. You can't do that quietly. Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech and in conduct and in love and in faith and in purity. Until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, to exhortation and to teaching. Verse 15. So those verses are very important as well. And 2 Timothy, again, chapter 4, verse 2. Another verse that you know probably off by heart. Preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and teaching. So those are the sort of ideas I want to get out of life, living life out loud. Those are the sort of ideas that sort of made me think, well, what is that? There's a theme here. There's something coming out that shows us just how we have to use this mouth that God has given to us. And so what I want to do over these next two sessions is talk about what we can find living life out loud from the Proverbs. You see, God gave us a mouth to use for his glory. Let's just do this. He gave us a mouth to use for his glory. He gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, but we still need to use that mouth. What we physically say makes a big impact on us. For example, if you are teaching someone about the Bible, for instance, and I've done a reasonable amount of Bible teaching myself, the things that I say, the talks that I've done, the Sunday school lessons that I've taught to people, the chats that I've had with people make more impact on me than they make on anyone else. Because what's happened is that I have said those things out loud. I've had to put those thoughts into practice and I've had to put my thoughts into words, and I've had to express those words so that people can understand them. And in doing so, I have learned a lot. If you think about when you're back at school, if you're back at school in the old days, like my days, where we had to learn our times tables. 3 1s are 3, 3 2s are 6, 3 3s are 9, and you'd go through as a whole class, and I won't go any further than that because I'll get it wrong. If you remember back to there, and what was happening was that you were doing it out loud so that it would reinforce the things that you said into your brain, and you would remember them. The Hitler Youth were the same. When Hitler was preparing his young armies, he had them chanting. and saying things and reciting his policies. And they all grew to be just like him. So what we physically say makes a big impact on us. Self-talk aspect of living life out loud. The most common and influential voice you will ever hear is your own. And if you think about self-talk, I mean, one of my colleagues at work has a baby daughter, and she must be coming up about 1 year old. She's just started to talk. No, just over 1 year old. She just started to talk. And the other day she was putting something back on the bench. She'd had a drink or something, and she put a cup back on the bench. And she said to herself, "Good girl." And if you say it like that, you're going to believe it. If you praise God out loud, you're going to grow joy, and you're going to find yourself not so tempted by sin. But on the other hand, we can also be negative. I can't do it. If you say, I can't do it, you're going to believe that too. Negative self-talk can take many forms. It can sound grounded. I'm not good at this, so I should avoid attempting it for my own personal safety. Or it could be just downright mean. I can never do anything right. Or it might seem like a realistic appraisal of the situation. I got a C in that test. I guess I'm no good at math. And it can even develop into a whole fear. Like, because I got a C in that test, I'll never be able to go to uni. And the thing about negative self-talk is that it can lead to self-blame, unrealistic guilt, depression, underachieving, stress, limited thinking, relationship problems, all that sort of thing. So I was really keen to look at the subject of living life out loud. And like I say, we're just going to scratch the surface of some of what's in Proverbs over the next two sessions. Praying out loud is another great thing to do out loud as well. And we're not going to look at that this session, but I just wanted to say it helps you focus and helps you to believe that what you have prayed was heard. And if you want to just follow that through, have a look through the Psalms and find out and just see all those different places where the psalmist prayed out loud to God, and you'll find it over and over and over and over. But we're not looking at Psalms tonight. We're going to look at Proverbs. And the first proverb I want to look at is this one. Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 and 9. Now, this is another live life out loud question. And this is where I want to take my focus tonight, is looking at lip balm. And the idea with lip balm is by speaking words of healing for people, making our lips as something that's going to heal others, and in this case here, standing up for the oppressed. So Proverbs 31 verses 8 and 9 says this: "Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of those who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the cause, the rights of the poor and needy." Now, if you're a bit like me, I'm a bit of a wimpy sort of person. And I remember, a number of times, particularly at school, where I didn't stand up for the rights of others. And often it was, that I didn't feel like I was the right person to do it. I was afraid of what my friends might do. I didn't know whether I had the authority to do it. What if people didn't believe me? What if people thought, "Oh, you're just being stupid"? And I was certainly not experienced at standing up for other people. I didn't know how to fight or to argue. I didn't want to badmouth other people in standing up for the rights of someone else. I don't know what to do. I'm no good at persuasion or fighting. I'm no good at talking to the boss. I'm scared. And, if I did try, probably no one would take any notice of me anyway. I don't know whether I'm a bit like that. So that's my sort of take on this. Those are my excuses. That's why I haven't very often opened my mouth for the mute, for the rights of those who are destitute. That's why I haven't opened my mouth to judge righteously, to defend the cause of the rights of the poor and needy. Now, Moses was a man who did. Moses was a man who had the nature of someone who actually wanted and was able to stand up for the oppressed. And so we can learn from him. Come with me we're going to think about this verse of Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 and 9. But I want you to come with me to Exodus chapter 2, because through the story of Moses, we're going to go very quickly through the story of Moses. We're not going to look at all the details or anything like that, but there's specific things that we want to pick up. And what we're going to see is that Moses was the sort of person who had it in his nature to stand up, to speak out for the rights of those poor and needy. Have a look at chapter 2, Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. One day, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and he looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. Well, there's an injustice. That's bad. And then you can see the picture of the Egyptian beating the Hebrew, and Moses just going past and looking. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand. That was Moses in his element, defending the rights of the poor and the needy. Have a look at the next two verses 13 and 14. Then he went out the next day, and behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, "Why do you strike your companion?" There's Moses again. "Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy." And he answered, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses was afraid and thought, surely this thing is known. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of those who are destitute. Oh, actually, verse 16 and 17. Sorry, that's where we're up to. Then he ran away, of course, from Egypt, and he found himself in Midian. Now, verse 16. Now, the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away. But, look at this, here's Moses again, in his element. But Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. It was actually a really good move on Moses' part, because the next thing we know, he's married one of the girls. So he got quite a decent reward out of that. And so Moses, really, in Egypt, in his early years, in his first 40 years, did exactly what that verse in Proverbs chapter 31 says. Well, those two verses. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of those who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Now, the interesting thing is that God has the same nature as Moses. Have a look at Exodus chapter 2, verse 23 to 25. So just at the end of that chapter. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. That was loud again, with life out loud, and they were doing it. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. You see, God was just like Moses, or Moses was just like God. He wanted to champion the cause of the poor and oppressed. So God was going to do something about it. He was going to find a man who thought the same way as he did, who couldn't stand to see injustice or oppression. And he found Moses. Come with me to chapter 3 of Exodus, verses 7 to 10. Then the Lord said to Moses, look, let's just move the PowerPoint along. Then the Lord said to Moses, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and bring them up to a land that is good, a land flowing with milk and honey. To a place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. And I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Can we shut the bird up, please, Karis? Is that possible? Thank you. Please excuse our cockatiel. It's nice. It's nicer. So God saw their oppression, and he went to send Moses. Now, Moses had some excuses. Now, listen to this. Chapter 3, verse 11. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Not me. Who am I? I'm not the right person. I've tried before and failed. You've got the wrong guy, God. And maybe Moses had been engaging in some negative self-talk. Who was I to think I could make a difference? Here I am, a refugee, a coward, hiding selfishly so that I can just stay alive. God came out with a solution. Verse 12. He said, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought these people out of Egypt, you will serve God on this mountain. So that was excuse number one. Who am I? I'm not the right person. And God's solution was this: I will be with you. And I promise you, there will be an end to this, and you will succeed. Proverbs 24, verse 11 and 12 says this. Don't bother turning it up, but it says this: does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? If God has put a circumstance in your environment where you can speak out for the oppressed or for those who have no voice, then it's our job, our responsibility, and God will be with us. He will also judge us for what we do or we don't do. And what those verses in Proverbs 24 are talking about is it's talking about rescue those being led away to death. Save them who are being dragged away. And then it just adds that last little comment at the end. Does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? God knows. So if God has put someone in your life that needs to be rescued, that needs someone to stand up for them, you are that person. Just as Moses was that person for Israel. And God will be watching. He will judge us for what we do or we don't do. So then we come to excuse number 2. Chapter 3, Exodus chapter 3, verse 13. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I say to them? So what Moses is saying here is, I have no authority to intervene. What he was saying all the way through really was, I'm scared. But he hedges it in these terms, I have no authority to intervene. I don't know what to say. And in verse 14 and 15, we get that God's reply. God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to this people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. I am. Not I will be, not I was. I am right here with you right now. I am your strength. I am your refuge. I am your strong tower. I am your authority. I am powerful. I am strong. I am forever. Moses was no longer going to be acting in his own power or authority. His whole power and authority was God's. God was sending him. I am is powerful and awesome and ready to free the oppressed. And you know what? Our authority comes from the same source. When we stand up to speak out for those who are oppressed, our authority is not just ours on our own. It's not just me standing up all by myself. It's God with us. I am. We need not fear any repercussions because the great I am is in control. So let us stand up in confidence, knowing that when God is with us, we can and we must do his will. Then Moses had another excuse. Exodus 4, verse 1. Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. So what if they don't believe me? Is what he was asking. So God gave Moses another solution. The Lord said to him, verse 2, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And God gave Moses 3 signs. The sign that the rod becomes a snake. He gave him the sign of putting his hand into his shirt, like that, and it came out leprous. Put it back in, comes out healed. And he gave him the sign of turning water to blood. Those are all in verses 2 to 9. What if they don't believe me? I'll give you signs, said God. The next excuse was in verse 4 and verse 10. But Moses said to the Lord, oh my Lord, I'm not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue. I can't talk. I don't know the words. God said this. Verse 11. Then the Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and will teach you what you should speak. Live life out loud. Use your mouth to give God glory. I will be with your mouth, said God, and I will tell you what to speak. And there's no excuse for us for not standing up again for the people that can't speak up for themselves. Because God will, like he did for Moses, will teach us what to say. I will teach you what you should speak. Moses wasn't finished. Chapter, I haven't written the verse down. There it is, verse 13. But he said, "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else." Now, I think Moses had actually run out of excuses, because please send someone else is not an excuse. This is like, I just want to get out of this. I'm scared. I don't want to do it. And the fifth solution that God gave was that I will give Aaron to talk for you. And the warning that we have here is this, in verse 14. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And you shall take in your hand the staff with which you shall do the signs. God was going to provide everything Moses needed to be able to speak up for the needs of his oppressed people. And God will do the same for us. If he puts us in a circumstance where we need to stand up for the needs of someone else, because someone else is being oppressed or abused or whatever, God will help us, I believe, just like he helped Moses, because he wants us to do it, and he won't leave us resourceless to do what he wants, what he has asked us to do. And I want you to see the result of this. Chapter 4, verse 31. I love these first four words. And the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshipped. They believed Moses. Isn't that cool? You never know. If we stand up for the needs of the poor and the afflicted, if we speak out for them, if we open our mouths and become the lip balm that those people need, you never know. Someone else might become a believer because we stood up for them, or because they heard us speak up for someone else. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of those who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Now, the next little bit in Proverbs that I'd like to look at about living life out loud. So if we've looked at this one verse, there's a group of 4 verses that I'd like to look at. I'm just going to read them out to you. And if you want to write them down, you're welcome to write them down, or however you want to do it. It is recorded, so you can write it down later if you want. So the first one is Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18. The tongue of the wise brings healing. Let's move over one. Tongue of the wise brings healing. I think that's a very encompassing sort of verse that sort of covers the next few as well. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 17. A faithful envoy brings healing. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 30. Good news refreshes the bones. And Proverbs chapter, there's 5 of them. Proverbs chapter, 16, verse 24. Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. And in Proverbs chapter 28, verse 13, he who conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but who confesses and forsakes them will obtain mercy. And again, what I wanted to do was with this section is just to have a look at a really classic example of someone who used his mouth to bring healing. And the person I want to look at in this regard is actually just basically one step before Moses, and the person of Joseph. How are we going for time? There we go. Genesis chapter 42, verse 21 to 24. And what's happened in the story of Joseph so far is he's had his dreams. Joseph's been sold into Egypt by his jealous brothers. They grabbed him one day, they threw him into a pit, they were about to kill him, and then they decided, well, actually we can make some money. So they threw him in a pit and they dragged him out, sold him to some Midianite traders. He ended up in Egypt. He was bought as a slave in Egypt, got into a bit of trouble because his master's wife took a fancy to him, ended up in prison, foretold a couple of dreams, and became a prime minister of Egypt when Pharaoh had some dreams that needed to be interpreted. So that was basically where we are with the story of Joseph, for those of you who don't know. But where we are now, in chapter 42, is that there's a famine throughout the land, and Joseph's brothers are all heading into Egypt because Joseph has grain, but they don't know that Joseph's there. So chapter 42, verse 21. And I find it. So what they're doing is they're all standing in front of Joseph. He put them in prison for a moment, for 3 days, and then he brought them out, and he treated them really roughly, just to try them, to see how they would react. And this is what happened when he was standing there with them. Now, they were speaking Hebrew, and he was speaking Egyptian. They didn't know he could speak Hebrew. Then they said to one another, in truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered them, did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood. They did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. But he turned away from them and wept. What we see there is that the brothers confessed. Proverbs chapter 28, verse 13 says, he who conceals his transgressions will not prosper. And while they were in Canaan, they were not prospering. They were suffering from famine. But he who confesses and forsakes them will obtain mercy. And so there we find that the brothers are not specifically confessing to Joseph. They didn't realize that he could understand them. But their sin was coming to the surface, and their confession was flowing out of them anyway. James chapter 5, verse 16 has a beautiful way of putting this. And again, you probably know the verse almost off by heart. I'm going to read it anyway because I'll probably get it wrong. James chapter 5, verse 16 says this, therefore confess your sins one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. And there we have that lip balm, don't we? That lip balm of confession and prayer and bringing healing to those cracked lips. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. James finishes. Confess your sins one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. And this is what was happening in this story of Joseph, where we see, what we're going to see in this story is the reconciliation and the healing of 12 brothers and their whole families. And we're going to see this amazing healing take place because of the way that the brothers and Joseph used their words and their tongues and their lips. We had a really interesting discussion the other day with a brother who was telling us about his time of confession, and he said, he'd been living a pretty riotous sort of, pretty miserable life. He was selfish. He was drinking excessively. He was smoking. He felt like he was pretty much the worst of sinners. And finally, he came to his senses, and he said, as he spoken to another brother about his problems, he said he finally confessed, and he said it was the most amazing and the most healing time he had ever experienced. And I can relate to that. I know what it's like to be healed by the tongue because you've confessed, and it's just so freeing and so beautiful. And sorry, words are failing me on this, because it's a bit like Paul going, seeing the third heaven there, and words are not enough to describe it. What confession can do is it just frees and gives you so much joy. It's incredible. Keep that in mind, because that is one of those great healing properties. When we can live life out loud to do that. Some simple words to use, just while we're on the confession thing. I was wrong. I love this. Bob Lloyd, I think it was Bob Lloyd that sent us this years ago. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. You'll take the wind out of almost anyone's sails with those 3 short sentences. Confess. Because confession is one of the most healing words. Some of the confession are the most healing words. It's not the right way of saying it, but they are it's the most healing thing you can do in a spiritual sense. So let's carry on with the story. Genesis 43, verse 27. Then he inquired about their welfare. So Joseph's brothers had just come back to him. They'd come for lunch at his house, and he inquired about their welfare and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" You'll find the same question in chapter 43, verse 7, and chapter 45, verse 3. And what we learn from Proverbs, the proverb that I've put with this, is Proverbs chapter 15, verse 30. Good news refreshes the bones. And I can imagine Joseph there at that time. He had been away from his family for something like 20 years or more. He had been away from his family. He had no news from home. He'd been a slave. He'd been in prison. He was probably well out of the whole current events thing that was going on in the whole world at that time. And then his brothers arrived. And he just wanted news from home. He just wanted to know, is his brother alive? Is his father alive? How's the whole family? And so Joseph asks, how is he? How's my dad? And no doubt the brothers gave their formal sort of answer. But later on, if we just have a quick skip across to the chapter 45, verse 3, Joseph's first question when he revealed himself to his brothers was this: I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? Well, actually, he knew because they'd said so before, but he wanted the honest answer. He wanted that healing in his spirit from that answer of peace that they would be able to give him. Now, there's an interesting one here in Proverbs chapter 44. Oh, sorry, Genesis chapter 44, verses 1 to 13. Now, we're not going to read all this, but in verses 1 to 13, Joseph commanded the steward of his house, and he says this: go and fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put everyone's money in the mouth of their sack, and the silver cup, my silver cup, has to go in Benjamin's sack, and along with his money for his grain, and then let them go. And so the boys, with the 11 brothers, went off. And they're probably thinking, phew, that was a relief. We're actually getting away from Egypt, and we're fine. We're loaded up with food. We'll be all right for a little while again. And this is a really scary place, and they're just really glad to be off, and they're glad to be free. And I can imagine that sort of like the burdens just being released from them. And Simeon was out of prison. They were all 11 of them traveling together, just as they'd hoped. And then next thing, Joseph sends his steward out. He sends his steward out after his brothers. Whoever's got my silver cup dies. The steward was sent out to reprove and condemn the brothers. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 17 says, a faithful envoy brings healing. Now, this must have been a pretty horrible time, not only for Joseph's brothers, but also for the servant, for the steward of his house, because he had to go out there and he had to speak really roughly. He had to go and basically arrest these guys who were running away from the city, well, traveling home. He had to basically go and get them and bring them back. And But what was happening was this man was doing his part in the healing that was needed. And so he was fulfilling that verse in Proverbs where it says that the faithful envoy brings healing. And our job might not always be likable. It might not always be nice words. But obedience to our master is vitally important to bring the healing that was needed. And then in chapter 45, verses 4 and 8, we read a beautiful little section of this story. Now, this is where the healing really comes to pass. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, please. Don't be distressed. Come near to me, please. And they came near. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and so to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Come near, Joseph's saying. Don't be distressed. And Joseph speaking kind words to them. Joseph speaking forgiveness and love. Flick over to Genesis chapter 50, verse 15 to 21. And this is a few years later, and they've all come to live in the land of Egypt, and Jacob's come as well, Joseph's father, and they've all lived a really prosperous life in Egypt. They've been healed. They've had this bond of friendship and brotherly love is sort of growing between them, but there was something missing. And when Jacob died, suddenly Joseph's brothers were scared. And when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave us this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you." And then we have almost a confession again. "And now, please, forgive the transgression of your servants of the God of your father." And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones." And these are the verses, these are the words we need to really listen to. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. The tongue of the wise brings healing. And that's what Joseph was doing for his brothers. His tongue was bringing healing to his family. Proverbs 16 verse 24 says, "Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body." And I want you to imagine a moment that it hadn't gone this way. Imagine if Joseph had, if Jacob had died and Joseph had gone, "Oh no," and we'd buried Jacob, and then he'd gone, "Now's my chance." And he'd started to pick on his brothers and to use his power and authority to make life miserable for them. Imagine if he'd put them in prison and he'd made them slaves and imagine being one of Joseph's brothers in that situation. The stress of what Joseph could do to you would just be so heavy. Not only that, but all that fear and that guilt and that all those horrible old feelings would have just come straight back on them. But Joseph spoke kindly to his brothers. He spoke words like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the bodies of his brothers. Now, the lesson for today, if I can do this, I'm feeling a little bit like one of those TV presenters now, leans forward and goes. And the lesson for today is that we need to speak those honey-like words to each other to bring healing to each other. We need to be able to stand up for the oppressed, to speak out for them, to speak out for those who are not so well off as ourselves. That's what living life out loud is about today. We need to use our voices to give glory to God by speaking words of healing and standing up for the oppressed. And so that's our challenge for this week, really, to make sure we use our words, to make sure that when we open our mouths, it's to give words of healing, comfort, love, and life to those around us, to make sure that we live life out loud for God.